All right, welcome to the Jim Acosta Show. It's another day that ends in Y in the Epstein Gate cover-up. Trump said he would release the Epstein files. That hasn't happened. He's now claiming it's not unusual that his personal attorney is meeting with Epstein's ex-girlfriend behind bars just before she was moved to a minimum security prison. Not unusual. Everything is unusual in how Donald Trump is handling all of this, and that's putting it mildly. My big guest for this hour is Spencer KUVIN. He is a personal attorney for several of the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein. Spencer, it's good to talk to you. Really appreciate your time. I guess, first of all, how has been the reaction from some of these Epstein survivors that you're in contact with? I guess ever since this controversy got started, what was it, about a month ago, when the Justice Department put out that memo saying there's nothing to see here with the Epstein files, and they tried to sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Jim. I do appreciate it. You know, a lot of times what gets forgotten in this whole story is, frankly, the victims. We're talking about, the drama surrounding Epstein and all of the people involved with Epstein, but it's really about the victims and what happened to them now going on almost 20 years ago, right? So this story has been around since its inception about 20 years ago when this whole thing broke out. These are victims who have been disappointed by the federal government on repeated occasions, right? If we go back to the origination of the story, these victims were disappointed because the state attorney refused to prosecute the case originally. Then the FBI picked up the case and promised them they would prosecute it, and they didn't. And then they're disappointed because the FBI enters into a sweetheart deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office and Epstein. And then they're disappointed again years later when he's rearrested and they allow him to somehow die in jail. And now they're just being disappointed yet again by the Trump administration, promising to release information about co-conspirators that we know exist. We know they're out there, and they're still playing hide the ball. It's frustrating. They have been continually frustrated. And now for most of their adult lives, they've had no justice.
Yeah. And it's very strange the way Trump has behaved in all of this. I mean, he looks like somebody who has something to hide. I've said that repeatedly on this show. I don't think that that's a stretch. I think that's a perfectly fair thing to say. I mean, this is somebody who said during the 2024 campaign and before that he was fine with releasing the Epstein files. Multiple people who now serve in his administration, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, and so on, all said the same thing. J.D. Vance, who's apparently having this strategy meeting tonight. And then, to talk about this Epstein stuff and how they're going to roll it out, I suppose. But, then Todd Blanche, Trump's personal attorney now, Justice Department lawyer, top lawyer at the Justice Department, goes down to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell. And just a few days later, she's moved to a minimum security prison. And I'm sure you've seen this, Spencer, but let's play it for the viewers. Trump was trying to blow this off yesterday as no big deal. He said it's not unusual that this whole thing took place. Let's listen to that.
Just a very highly thought of person, respected by everybody. And I didn't talk to him about it, but I will tell you that whatever he asked would be totally appropriate, and it's not an uncommon thing to do that. And I think he probably wants to make sure that, people that should not be involved or aren't involved are not hurt by something that would be very, very unfortunate, very unfair to a lot of people. But I will say this, Todd Blanche is one of the most highly respected people you'll ever meet. So I know this. I didn't discuss it with him, but anything he talked about with her or the fact that he did that, not unusual, number one, and most importantly is something that would be totally above board.
Yeah, not unusual, Trump says. What do you think?
I mean, how many different things about what he just said are just not correct? I would start with the not unusual part. It is unusual. It's highly unusual. Look, the transfer of her from one facility to another, that did not occur, or the fact that that was going to happen didn't happen after the interview. My guess is, in dealing with these exact kind of cases, in fact, I had a sex trafficking case where I had to conduct a deposition, sworn testimony of a sex trafficker that was behind bars in jail just last week. And he came out of his cell. He showed up for the deposition, says, "I'm not talking to you." They don't have to talk to anyone. Ghislaine Maxwell did not have to talk to the DOJ. She could have just refused it. My guess is her lawyer probably said, if you want her to talk to you, you better give her something. What can you give her to convince her to talk to you? And they probably rolled out the offer of transfer to a nicer facility in Texas and said, look, if she gives us the time and talks to us, we'll agree to a transfer so that she can go to a nicer facility. So it was a strictly quid pro quo. That's how these things work. When you have a bargaining chip, even if you're an inmate, you're going to play it. But
Yeah.
you don't conduct an interview with someone who's a convicted liar. Nothing that woman says can be trusted. Nothing.
Yeah.
The only thing that we can trust and the only thing the victims want to see is the evidence, the physical evidence, the videotapes that we know the FBI has over thousands of hours of videotapes taken inside the mansions, the documents, right? All of those investigative memos that the FBI has done. That's what needs to come out, not a lying, convicted sex predator who is going to get up and lie to save her own tail.
Yeah, and what do you think they're trying to hide here? I mean, what do we think is in those files? I mean, is there anything that you can share in terms of what your knowledge is? I mean, I know you probably can't get into names and that sort of thing, but maybe you can. I don't know. But what can you share? What do you think they're hiding?
Here's what I can say with certainty, because this is generally in the public domain at this point after this many years of, little bits of information leaking out.
Yeah.
We know that a number of people visited the mansions that he had in Manhattan, in Palm Beach, in New Mexico, and in the Virgin Islands. We know that a number of very famous people, politicians, actors, notable individuals have flown on his jets back and forth to different locations. Royalty, including and up to royalty. So those people that are out there already, we know that they traveled and were traveling within his circle. Epstein's orbit always contained young girls. Wherever he went, he had young, teenage, young girls around him everywhere. So if you're traveling with Jeffrey Epstein to Jeffrey Epstein's home, it would have been impossible for anyone in that orbit to not see what is happening around you with these young girls. It's odd, right?
Yeah.
You should never, if you're a politician or a famous individual, want to be caught around somebody who has a cache of young girls around him. It's just odd. That's even if they didn't do anything inappropriate. It's just inappropriate to be friends with a guy. And then we know that there were individuals, including royalty, that were socializing with him even after he was convicted here in South Florida. After my cases were finished and he then pled guilty and got the sweetheart deal, he still had people that were socializing with him and pretending like it never happened.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's been reported that Donald Trump flew on the plane. And, I don't know what you can say about that, but in the cases that you dealt with, the victims, the survivors that you represented, were there any dealings with Ghislaine Maxwell? Was she in the picture at that point? And what do those folks, and I feel terrible for them, these victims, these survivors, what do they say about Maxwell?
So there were two groups of victims.
Yeah.
Back in the original cases that I handled in 2007, 2008, those were all very young local girls that went to a local high school called Royal Palm Beach High School here in the Western community in Palm Beach County. These girls were ages 14 to 16 years old, who were convinced to come out to the mansion on Palm Beach Island back in the early 2000s. And ended up in a situation where Epstein had them, get undressed and naked massages and whatnot at his home here in Palm Beach. They did not interact with Maxwell. They interacted with recruiters that were working in the Palm Beach mansion that were young girls in their 20s who had recruited them, essentially working in this recruiting scheme.
Yeah.
Those recruiters would work with Maxwell directly. And Maxwell would train the recruiters how to get young girls. And from time to time, Maxwell would also reach out and find young girls to recruit and bring back to Epstein and again, to become victims. We had evidence in one of our cases where Miss Maxwell literally was in a car with another witness and stopped the car in the middle of the streets and saw a young girl walking on the street in a little high school uniform, stopped her, gave her her number, and said, "You should call me. I work for a guy that handles models, and we love, you're beautiful, and you need to come visit us." That's what she was doing. She was hunting. In addition to that, I had one victim who went public, Caroline Kaufman in New York, and she was recruited out of a horse show in upstate New York and brought to the home in Manhattan. And she was actually attacked sexually by not only Epstein, but in addition, Miss Maxwell. So Maxwell was not only just recruiting victims, but she was playing a part actively in the abuse of victims.
And so what are your clients saying when they hear that there's this very strong speculation that Donald Trump is going to pardon her, that there's going to be a quid pro quo? I mean, according to ABC News, during her interview with Blanche, she said nothing would be harmful to Donald Trump, telling Blanche that Trump had never done anything in her presence that would have caused concern. This is according to sources familiar with what she said. This is what they're telling ABC News.
Sure.
Now, yeah.
So let's parse that.
Yeah, that's very self-serving sounding. Yeah,
let's
go ahead.
parse that statement for a minute.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Right? She says that I didn't, meaning her, she didn't see anything that she found inappropriate. She didn't find sex trafficking inappropriate. She didn't find raping young girls inappropriate. So how are we to utilize her judgment of what is and is not appropriate to determine whether or not she believes someone, Trump or anyone else, did anything appropriate or not? And again, she said very carefully, I didn't witness anything, which means that if she provided a young 14-year-old to someone, anyone, right? Let's not say it's Trump. Let's say it's Mr. Jones. And Mr. Jones takes this 14-year-old behind a closed door. I don't know what's happening behind that closed door, but I have a strong idea what's happening because of the sex trafficking that I've been doing for the last 10 years. So look, there are so many ways that her attorney can coach her to give answers that may be helpful to the administration, but yet are still subverting the truth. That's why videotapes, documented evidence, that's what the victims want released, not some liar who's going to testify just to save her skin.
Yeah. And I mean, those files are kind of a mother lode, right? I mean, they have a lot of very important information in there.
Absolutely.
And this is what the survivors want. This is what they've been asking for years. And
we have always advocated the co-conspirators are just as guilty and should all be brought down and should have been brought down when Epstein was convicted.
Yeah. And what do you think is the potential if Ghislaine Maxwell is pardoned, if she is set free? What do you suspect the blowback to be like, the reaction to be like?
It would be absolutely unbelievable and an atrocious miscarriage of justice. I mean, it would just be absolutely awful for something like that to occur. But again, there are ways that the administration can do it without having a large blowback. In other words, to minimize the blowback, the administration could say, look, if you testify and keep everything about Trump quiet and say he didn't do anything wrong, then what we'll do is we'll commute your sentence. And immediately before Trump leaves office, the day before he leaves office, he signs a commutation and her sentence is over, thus decreasing her sentence to 3.5 years from now, or 4 years from now, getting released.
Yeah.
That's a way he could do it and not care about the blowback at that point because he's walking out of office.
Yeah. And in the meantime, he's made her life more comfortable by moving her to this minimum security prison, which, I mean, the Washington Post had a story out this morning. They talked to a variety of, corrections experts who say, this is, contrary to what Trump says, this is all highly unusual.
Of course it is. It's incredibly unusual. It violates the Department of Justice and Department of Prison's own standards and protocols for who can be and who cannot be transferred to a facility like this, which is infamously known as Club Fed. I mean, they get customized workouts every day and can walk around and chit chat with the others, and, you know, specialized meals. And it's a hotel that they just can't leave.
Yeah. And, you know, the other thought that's been on my mind, and I wanted to ask you about is, I mean, I spoke with Jeffrey Epstein's brother, Mark Epstein, a couple of weeks back, and he suspects, and, you know, if you talk to Julie Brown over at the Miami Herald, she has feelings on this as well, that there's something fishy with Jeffrey Epstein's suicide, as it's been described by the authorities.
Real fishy.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've seen the evidence when it occurred. You know, I had a number of people that reached out to me because of my connections with the case for so long and for so many years. I actually had a former guard that was at a fairly high level at the institution where he was being held. Now, the guard that called me made it clear he wasn't working there at the time. He had left and retired. But the way he explained it to me was that this was a prison within a prison within a prison. I mean, it was the most secure prison that we have here on the East Coast of the United States. You've got terrorists that bombed, you know, the
Right.
World Trade Center that were being held at this particular prison. There are cameras everywhere. And for Jeffrey Epstein to be able to allegedly commit suicide in a facility like this, you would have had to have a massive failure within the system. And they said that cameras weren't working.
Right.
2 guards fell asleep. His cell was littered with bed sheets and wires and pills and all kinds of things strewn about his cell. He had just been removed from protective custody on suicide watch, where he would have had a second roommate or a cellmate that was in with him. So all of that had to occur, which means that it was a massive failure on the part of Department of Justice, which they never investigated the failures, and nobody has been reprimanded as far as I've heard.
Yeah.
Or he didn't commit suicide. And the one piece of physical evidence that has me convinced that it wasn't suicide is a picture from his autopsy showing the ligature mark on his neck. That is the most convincing evidence I think I've seen, because unfortunately I have seen in my career suicides and autopsies before. And when you have a ligature mark and somebody is hung, the ligature mark is at an angle because they're hanging from the second rung of the bunk bed, which is where they claim he had hung himself. And that ligature mark is going to be angled. If you look at the ligature mark that he had, it's straight across his neck, almost as though it was from directly behind him. That, again, physical evidence is what I rely upon, not people and testimony. That physical evidence does not comport with a suicide. So it's highly suspect. And, you know, look, all I would say is that I hope Ghislaine Maxwell has evidence that's protected somewhere, physical evidence that she can use to protect her own skin, because I wouldn't be surprised if she doesn't make it out alive either.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, that's been on my mind too, is, you know, what happens to her? But, you know, when you mentioned the evidence, the physical evidence from the prison where Epstein was being held, there's also this issue of missing footage, missing security camera footage. Pam Bondi apparently put out this excuse that, you know, 1 minute of every day there's a gap in the security camera footage. And then just the other day, CBS News reported, I'm sure you saw this, that the FBI apparently is in possession, or the Department of Justice is in possession of the full video, that there is not a gap missing in that video. And so there are all of these crazy questions that are emerging in this case. And it just begs the question, what are they hiding? What are they covering up? Why won't they release the files? It seems to me the public has at least the oversight committee up on Capitol Hill in the House of Representatives should have the ability to review that footage and see, you know, what the unedited footage or the unaltered or whatever it is footage looks like. Because that sounds strange too.
The footage doesn't show inside of his cell, though.
Right? That's right.
The footage shows outside of his cell, people entering or leaving, or, you know, That's
That's
not
right.
going to be the penultimate footage that you would want to see. You'd want to see the footage from inside of his cell. And apparently those cameras weren't working.
Yeah.
Right. So who the heck knows? And
Yeah.
and look, as far as the congressional oversight, one of the things that I think is important to note that's missing from the subpoenas that were issued by Congress, I did not see where they have issued a subpoena for Alex Acosta. Alex
Yeah.
Acosta was the lead prosecutor at the Southern District of Florida. He's the one that shut out my clients and didn't tell them that this deal was going down. He's the one that negotiated the sweetheart deal and signed off on it. He's the one that the federal judge here in Miami said violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act by failing to inform the victims that they were negotiating a deal.
Yeah. And Trump strangely made him the labor secretary. I remember this because
Where's his subpoena?
where is Alex Acosta? And I as I often point out, no relation here, but
No relation. Yes.
no relation, but I do think that that's a very important point because you're right. The Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer put out those subpoenas and he asked for Bill and Hillary Clinton and all these attorneys general and so on, but not Alex Acosta.
Why not ask for
What's
the
up with that?
lead prosecutor
Yeah.
who's seen all the evidence? He's seen it all because he had to. He prepared a 40-count indictment that we still haven't seen. They buried the indictment.
So what's your sense of how this is going to play out? Do you think Maxwell cuts a deal? She's sprung loose. She's pardoned. I know you thought that maybe it might happen towards the end of his administration, but that's a long time for her to be cooling her heels inside Club Fed. And I just kind of wonder where this might be heading. And I guess the larger question is, do you think Donald Trump has something to hide here? Personally?
Yes, I absolutely think he does. Without a doubt, I think he has something to hide. Whether or not it's something that's criminal or whether or not it's just his associations and multiple times that he appears in the record with regards to Epstein, that we wouldn't know until we actually see the documents. But he definitely doesn't want his name associated with this pedophile and this sex trafficker. So, and we do know that his name appears in the record numerous times. We just don't know what context he appears within the records. And I think that would be embarrassing to him if it came out that way. So he's trying to avoid that. What I would also point out is they throw up this false concept of security that, we audio taped the interview. Okay, well, I've audio taped interviews before. How many times do you sit, even for you, Jim, right? We talked before the tape started rolling, did we not? And we discussed some issues before the tape started rolling, right?
Sure.
It happens all the time. So then the attorney gets in there and says, okay, listen, here's the deal. If you exonerate Trump, we'll cut you a deal. And here's the deal. Here's how it's outlined. You can talk about anybody else. Just don't talk about Trump. You good with that? Okay, I'm good with that. Okay, record.
Yeah. But that's not on the recording. Exactly.
You would never know. You would
never know.
That's why all of this needs to be in the open. But it's...
And when they say, well, we'll put out grand jury testimony, and I guess she has said, no, I don't want the grand jury testimony out there, probably because she doesn't want more damaging testimony out there that's been released, painting the picture of a monster, which is what she is. And she doesn't want that out there. But, the grand jury testimony is not going to tell us anything as it relates to Donald Trump. I can't imagine that would say anything.
There were only 4 victims in the grand jury. That's it. There were 4 victims that were discussed and only 2 witnesses that testified. It's a very limited piece, very small piece of this entire story. Yeah.
And what is life like for the survivors? You use the word victims, and that is, I know people say, oh, we should call them survivors, but they are victims. I mean, that's the way it is. They were victimized. They were raped and abused and so on. But what is life like for the ones that you've represented? I just have to think their lives were taken from them. That's the awful tragedy of this.
Yes. And I think that's the case with some of the victims. And I think it is it's very individual how trauma affects a young child and how that affects them growing up into their future and adulthood and parenthood and whatnot. It is individual to each victim. So there is no generic way to say, okay, when this happens to a child, it's going to affect them this way. Some of the victims have moved on with their lives, put this in their past, basically locked it in a box in the back of their brain, and I never want to deal with this again.
Yeah. And
they have families, they're married with children themselves, but it affects them in ways that aren't necessarily apparent to even them. So for example, they have daughters and they're now in their 30s, and their daughter wants to go to a friend's house for a party or an event. You become a hyper protective parent because of what happened to you as a child. And that hyper parenting can affect how you parent your own child. You have other women who were devastated and never really got over it and have mental issues, cope with drugs or alcohol because that's the way they were able to cope with the trauma that affected them. It's a real cross section of how it affects everyone.
do they ultimately get justice? Do they ultimately get the truth?
That would be the hope. But after 20 years of doing this, I'm not optimistic.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
And it has to be stated very clearly, somebody who is standing in the way of that right now is the President of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, as I've said numerous times on different networks, all he has to do is sign an executive order today. He has no qualms about signing executive orders on a heartbeat. Sign an executive order releasing everything. That's it. Stroke of a pen. I hereby direct the Department of Justice and FBI to release all documents and investigative files on Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Done. You could do it tomorrow.
Well, I don't see that happening, but Spencer KUVIN, I appreciate you giving your time and representing your clients the way that you have, and just being a truth teller in all of this. This cover up is just crying out for justice and for truth and something for these survivors, these victims, that they can hold on to and say, this struggle that I've been dealing with for all these years did add up to something.
I agree. I agree. And I would tell anyone and everyone that can access information on the internet, there were phone message books, phone message pads that were confiscated and taken by police at his mansion in Palm Beach. I implore everyone to find them and read them. Find out who was calling the house. There's information that I just can't disclose, but any information that's in the public domain, it's free and fair game. And the press and individuals should be asking everyone who called that house and who's showing up on those message pads, why were they calling that house?
Yeah, it's a damn good question. Maybe we'll look into that. Spencer KUVIN, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. I am coming to you live from Colorado. So yes, don't have my usual studio behind me. And if it seems like, I'm at the airport, it's because I'm at the airport. I wanted to bring this to you earlier today, had some travel issues, and so here I am. But you know what? The news doesn't stop, and neither does the show, and neither does our quest for the truth when it comes to the Jeffrey Epstein case, as we've been calling it, Epstein Gate, ever since the Department of Justice, about a week ago or so, released that Department of Justice memo that basically attempted to sweep all of this under the rug. I have a special guest. I was a little bit shady in terms of who I was going to have on this afternoon, keeping my cards close to the vest, but I'm going to bring on now Mark Epstein. He is the brother of Jeffrey Epstein. Mark has asked that we not show his face, but we are going to bring his voice to you so you can hear from him. Mark, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Mark, thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. I guess, first of all, just to jump right into this, your thoughts on how all of this has been handled since, I guess it was a week ago Sunday, when the Department of Justice released that memo that tried to make the case that your brother was not murdered, that he committed suicide, and that there basically was no grand conspiracy, and that they weren't planning on putting out any kind of files or list, despite what Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, said. Your thoughts on all of that, and we'll catch up on some other things in the.
Okay, well, as I told you, my major concern is the circumstances around my brother's, what I now refer to as his murder. I used to say his death. But ever since he died, the government has been covering things up, not giving information. And it begs the question, if this purely was a suicide, why are they being so secretive? And why am I getting the runaround? And one thing that they don't mention, and it's very important, is that after Jeffrey died, the next day, they did an autopsy. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Roman, who was a New York City pathologist. And I had Dr. Bodden there to witness the autopsy because I have the right to have a pathologist there. And they both came out of the autopsy room saying they couldn't call it a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. And that's a picture of Jeffrey's cell door that you just put up. And
yeah,
you
show
don't
us
see
what
that
we're
cell
looking at
door.
here, Mark.
Okay, that's the cell door in the shoe. It's the maximum security tier of that was Jeffrey's cell. After he died, they put do not the police tape on it. But that's his cell door, which you do not see in the video that they released, because to get to that cell door, you have to first enter the maximum security tier. Do you have that? Could you put up that picture with the staircase and the door to the tier?
Yeah, we'll try to put that up. We have that picture and
Okay, so what I was saying is that they're not talking.
So we can put it up. Yeah.
Okay, well, then they're not. You don't hear mention that the actual autopsy, when it was performed by Dr. Roman with Dr. Bodden there, they came out saying they could not call this a suicide because it looked too much like a homicide. And on the initial death certificate that day, on the cause of death, it says pending further investigation, because to them, professionals, it looked like a homicide. And then a few days later, Dr. Sampson, the chief medical examiner, she calls it a suicide without any explanation of what further study was done. Bear in mind, she never saw the body. She wasn't at the autopsy. So what is she basing that conclusion on? It's just, and she won't speak to anybody about that. It's like, why? If this was a suicide, why the secrecy?
Yeah,
That's
my question too. I don't understand this. And, for the longest time, I think a lot of folks were not really paying as close attention to this case as they should have, because the government did put out the line that this was a suicide. But I talked to Julie Brown, an investigative journalist with Miami Herald, last week. I talked to Tara Palmieri, another investigative journalist, and they both say that there's reason to believe, and I think they point to the medical examiner that you were with, Mark, that there's reason to believe that this was a homicide. And there's the picture of the staircase that you mentioned leading up to the cell. What are we looking at here?
Okay, that's through that barred door at the top of the stair. That's the tier, the maximum security tier that Jeffrey's cell was on. So to go to Jeffrey's cell, you have to go up that staircase, enter through that barred door, and Jeffrey's cell was to the right of that door. When you enter that tier, it's like a long corridor, and there are 4 cells on either side. If you show the other photograph I sent to you, it's a picture of the tier itself, basically standing when you enter that door. It's a picture of the tier. You see 3 cells on each side. The closest one's not visible. Jeffrey's cell is on to the right side. Right, that's the tier. And if you look at the far wall of that tier, there's a camera on that wall pointing at you. So anything that took place on that tier would be captured by that camera on the far wall. But as we all know, that camera wasn't working that night. No
Yeah, what do you make of that? Yeah, Mark, I mean, apparently we don't have that camera and its footage from that night. There's apparently an interruption in some of the other footage. I mean, just, there's also the issue of the blankets and the pillows and the mattresses being in the cell. Apparently that wasn't standard operating procedure. It's just a lot of stuff here that doesn't add up.
I know. And in the video, they showed a guy walking, and you can't see that you can't make out that if that's Jeffrey. I don't think it is. It doesn't look like the way he walked. And I try to blow it up, You can't see who that person is. And they said they walked him over and he went into his cell. Now, from the pictures I just showed you, you can't just walk over and walk into a cell. You have to go up the stairs. You have to go through that barred door. Then Jeffrey's cell door was to the right. So it's not as simple as just walking through a door. So that's why when I first saw that, I said, that's not where Jeffrey was. That's not what his situation was. So it's why. Yeah. And then the other thing that really got to me is when Kash Patel came out, recently in a hearing, and he listed his credentials, and then he said, you know a suicide when you see it. And I laughed. I mean, how many suicides has this guy seen? And what's his expertise? He's not a pathologist. He's not a doctor.
Right.
I joked and I said,
right.
What does he have, a Boy Scout merit badge? In first aid? And Dr. Bodden, who has done about 500 autopsies over the last 50 some odd years that he's been doing this, he has done prison autopsies for 50 years. And Dr. Roman, who this was not her first autopsy, I don't know how many she's done, but they both professional forensic pathologists came out saying to them, this looks like a homicide, not a suicide. That's not mentioned in the Justice Department report at all. And that's also, why not?
And why is it, do you think, that Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, saying back in February, I have the client list on my desk, and then, she says the other day in the cabinet meeting with Trump, I was talking about the files. There's no way the Epstein files could possibly fit on her desk. As we know, it's a treasure trove of information. And so, I mean, what do you make of what Pam Bondi has been saying?
Well, like I said, I'm not that concerned with his case. I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not a defense attorney. But it seems like all of Trump lackeys will say anything they can to please him and try to squash this whole issue. And I use the word lackeys because that's what everyone calls them when they talk to me.
Well, and then there's the matter of Trump himself. I mean, I'm sure you saw this over the weekend. He put out this lengthy statement on Truth Social, all but begging his supporters, his loyalists, to give up on this case, to stop focusing on this case. He was standing up for Pam Bondi and so on. What did you think of that when you saw that?
Well, to be honest with you, I did not actually see that. I've been traveling the last week, so I've been on the road. I haven't seen it. I've heard about it a lot. And to me, it's sort of like, well, I'm not surprised because, assuming if Jeffrey was murdered, who was responsible and who are these people covering up for? And the people are telling me that it points to Trump. Someone should ask him what he knows about this.
Yeah, well, if we get the chance to ask him, we'll certainly ask him. But Mark, and for folks who are just tuning in, I'm talking to Mark Epstein, the brother of Jeffrey Epstein. And Mark, what about this relationship between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein? We've seen all the photographs. They're all over social media. People have seen those for years. Your thoughts on that? I know that they described each other as being very close friends for a long period of time.
They were good friends. They used to fly back and forth to Florida on each other's planes. I'm not going to say frequently, but certainly a lot more than once. And they used to hang out. And I know in the early 90s, Donald was in Jeffrey's office quite a bit when he was in financial trouble. He was talking to Jeffrey a lot. And Jeffrey would tell me if something funny happened. I mean, he was my brother, so we would relate funny stories to each other. He would tell me things, with Donald that might have been funny because he said Donald was a funny guy, and initially they had fun hanging out together, but then the relationship soured. And I was once with them together when we flew up from Florida. And this was back in 1999, before any of this trouble started. But they were good friends. I know Trump is trying to distance himself from that, but they were good friends.
Yeah, I mean, what do you make of that? Because now he calls him a creep and he says all of these things about your brother now. But I mean, if you look at the footage of them together, we've seen them dancing together on the dance floor. And I mean, I think Donald Trump told New York Magazine back in 2002 about how they were good friends and talked about Jeffrey's taste in women, as a matter of fact, and young ladies. And as it turns out, it was obviously more than that. But, do you think that there's any chance that Trump is in these files in a way that he doesn't want to see that information get out? And is he possibly motivated by all of this? I mean, it sure seems to me he's motivated by all of this and trying to keep this swept under the rug.
Well, it sounds plausible to me. I mean, your listeners their opinion on this is just as valid as mine. I mean, I wasn't there. I don't know what exactly took place, but I do know that Jeffrey told me he had dirt on Trump. I don't know what that was, but in the 2016 election, he said, if he said what he knew, they'd have to cancel the election. So that's a direct quote. So I don't know
It's
what
that
he knew,
serious.
but yeah, certainly. Yeah, and also at the time, if you recall, Steve Bannon said that the only person he feared for Donald Trump's sake was Jeffrey Epstein.
And so what does that mean? Did you?
Public.
Yeah, no, I remember that. But do you have any sense of what any of that means? I mean, is it one of those things where we just have to do the math ourselves and we can sort of draw our own conclusions? And I suppose that's enough to go to Trump and say, what gives? What's with all this?
Yeah, go to ask Trump, what does Jeffrey Epstein have? Why was Steve Bannon afraid of Jeffrey Epstein? What did Jeffrey Epstein know that made Steve Bannon afraid? That's a question I would ask. I think your listeners would want to ask the same question.
Oh, I think everybody wants to know now. I mean, Trump, maybe you saw the footage of him in the cabinet meeting when somebody asked the question, he tried to shut that down. I mean, I've been around him for a long time over the years. I've been up close with him. I think I know when he's worried. And it looked to me, he was freaking out the other day in the cabinet meeting. And if you look at that Truth Social post, which goes on about 3 pages, he's just obviously freaking out over this case. And to me, it just begs the question, what does he know? What's the deal? It's like the old Watergate question. What does the president know? What did the president know? When did he know it? And if he had anything to do with directing the Department of Justice to release that memo, obviously then the questions come back to the White House. Do you think that this is ever good? I mean, do you think that Donald Trump could possibly be behind what happened to your brother? Does that thought ever cross your mind? I know you mentioned something along these lines to Don.
Yes, I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I would not dismiss that possibility. Because, like I said, the people that are making all this thing, like Bill Barr initially, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, who do they work for? They work for Donald Trump. So, let's assume, like I said, I don't like to speculate, but if you want to go down that road, assume Trump was responsible. Okay, well, then he has his Justice Department cover it up. Because who else would be responsible that would have the power and be in a position to have the Justice Department, skew the facts. When you read the Justice Department report, there's a lot of inaccuracies in there, about the way Jeffrey was found. And the autopsy doesn't match the way they describe Jeffrey hanging. I mean, for almost 4 years, we were trying to find out what position Jeffrey was in when he was found. We could never find that out until the Justice Department report came out. And it seems that it really doesnit results of the autopsy. So
right, and there was there also an issue of how he apparently how it was described that he hung himself? I'm not going to stipulate that he did because we just don't know for sure, but how it was stipulated that he hung himself. That apparently there might have been some flaws in that story too. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, this is public information. It's in the Justice Department report. They said when he was found, he was in a seated position with his legs extended in front of him, and he was hanging from the top bunk in the cell. And when they either cut him down or tore him down, they said his buttocks was an inch and a half off the ground, which means the bulk of his body weight was hanging by the neck. Now, if you sit in that position with your feet extended, you have about 20 pounds of weight on your feet. And Dr. Bodden tells me the head weighs about 13 pounds. So there was about 150 pounds hanging on this ligature, or with the head, 160 somewhat pounds hanging on the ligature. First of all, I question whether that ligature made out of a bed sheet could support that weight. I've actually was able to purchase some linens from prisons and tested it, and it's questionable whether a 6-inch strip of that fabric could hold all that weight. And then if that's the way he was hanging, the mark on his neck, that was left in his neck should be high up under his chin and go up behind his ears. Like if you make believe, when you're kids, you lift your necktie up behind your head. But the mark on Jeffrey's neck is sort of in the center of his neck and goes straight back, more like a strangulation than a hanging. And also the way he was hanging, and we know he was dead for at least 2 hours before he was found. They could tell that by the mark that was left in his neck. Probably more than 2 hours, but at least 2 hours. Well, in that case, he should have what's called lividity on the back of his legs and his buttocks. You know, when you die, your blood stops circulating, and then it sinks in your body. Gravity takes it down to the lowest points, and you get like a blotchiness in the skin, looks like a port wine stain. And the back of his legs and his buttocks should have signs of lividity in it. It really doesn't. There are signs of lividity on his upper back. You know, so all these questions don't make sense. All these situations don't really add up.
And Mark, do you think we're ever going to? Yeah, do you think we're ever going to get to the truth in all of this?
Oh, I have no idea. I'd like to. I mean, somebody knows.
Because, you know, for the longest time, I mean, Trump was saying, release the Epstein files. J.D. Vance was saying, release the Epstein files. Kash Patel, the FBI director, for Pete's sake, saying, release the Epstein files. Bongino, you know, and apparently he was, threatening to quit his position at the FBI over the last few days. And Trump came out over the weekend and said, no, that's been patched up. That's not going to happen now. I mean, this is, I've never seen anything like this before.
Isn't that this government's MO, the way they operate? They say they're going to do something, and then 2 weeks go by, it doesn't happen. They just keep saying things that sound good, but there's no follow through. So am I surprised? Yeah. Absolutely not, because this is the pattern of this administration.
Yeah. Well, and I know that you haven't read Trump's note from over the weekend, his Truth Social post, but he now is claiming that the Epstein files are a fake. That they were written by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. I mean, he's trying pretty hard to pull the wool over the eyes of his supporters, it seems to me. And when he's saying ridiculous things like that, I mean, do you have any sense that there are Democratic, people behind writing this thing or covering it up? Or
Well, let me ask you a question. First of all, he was arrested under the Republican administration. The Democrats had nothing to do with that. And if everything's doesn't exist and there's no list and there's no file and there's nothing there, why was he in jail?
Right. Obviously, there was a case. Obviously, there was a file. Well, it just sounds to me, though, that you're left with obviously with maybe more questions now than ever before, because I know before you were trying to prove that it was a murder and that it was covered up. But now when you have the president of the United States who once said, release the Epstein files, declassify, whatever, now putting himself in front of those files, this takes on a whole new dimension, it seems to me.
Jim, this is not just my problem. This is a problem for every citizen of the United States, to know that an American citizen, looks like was killed in a federal prison, and the government's trying to cover it up. That should be of concern to all the citizens, not just me because I'm his brother. I'm concerned because I'm a citizen, and I don't think that should take place in my country. No matter what party you're in, you got to say this shouldn't be taking place here.
This shouldn't be taking place. There's no question about it. And your sense of where should the trail lead next? What would you like to see uncovered next? What is it that stands out to you? If there's one thing that just stands out to you that needs to be investigated, where would you tell investigators?
The first thing I would like to see is what I've asked for. After the death, Bill Barr referred to the tape that he saw. He said nobody went in or out of the tier, and that convinced him it was a suicide. Forget about the fact that there were 12 other prisoners on the tier that could have killed somebody. But I've asked for the tape from that camera from 10 o'clock the night before until noon the next day, because that would show when the last person left that tier, about 10:30 at night or so, when they locked up the tier. It would also show in the morning when Michael Thomas, the guard, went into the tier. That's when he found Jeffrey's body. And it would show when they took Jeffrey's body off the tier. We'd see who was there, who was, what condition he was in, how they handled this. And when I first asked for that, I was told I couldn't get that footage because it was an ongoing investigation. And I understand that. They keep it, under wraps. But then after the investigation was over, I asked for that footage again. And I was very specific, talking about the camera that showed the door, the footage that Bill Barr referred to, the footage from that camera. And then I was told, well, the two cameras that were working don't show that area. First, I couldn't get it
Yeah.
because it was under investigation, and now it doesn't exist. And now they release a tape claiming to be the footage from that camera. Again, it just boggles the mind how stupid it is that this is where we ended up. Someone's lying somewhere.
Somebody's lying somewhere. There's no question about it. Well, Mark, I appreciate you taking the time and jumping on the phone with us. And we're showing these pictures again, these photographs again that you sent to us. We're going to stay on it. If you can think of anything else that you want to raise, you're welcome to come back on my program anytime. To me, I have to say, for the longest time, I thought this was really just sort of a fixation of people on the far right and the fringe and so on. But the more I look at this, the more that I know other respected investigative journalists look at this, just doesn't smell right. And now that Trump is trying to get in the way of it, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And it seems to me he's up to something here.
Yeah, everyone who looks at all the information available, or of the bulk of it, comes to the same conclusion.
Yeah, something stinks. Yeah. Well, Mark Epstein, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, safe travels.
All right, you as well. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm doing my best to travel safe. I'm in Colorado right now, so folks notice that the backdrop behind me is a little different. That was Mark Epstein. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. And everybody, I mean, what can you say? It happens. This is modern era. I'm not going to blame this on the real world guy who runs the Department of Transportation, but maybe I should. Maybe that's the reason why my flights got all effed up today. And I was going to land over here, and then I landed over there, and then I had to get on a bus, and I had Mark Epstein booked, and I thought, well, I can't, what if I move the booking? The TV newsers who are watching can appreciate this. If you move the booking, do you still have the booking? So I thought, well, we got Mark, we got to get him on. I want to hear what he has to say. I haven't spoken to him personally, and I think what he has to say is very important. What he's asking is very important. What he's asking is basically for these files to be released, to get to the bottom of what happened to his brother. Not that he has a great deal of sympathy for the crimes that were committed, but because I think we're all feeling this at this moment. What is going on here? Don't we deserve answers? Don't we deserve the truth as to what is going on with this Jeffrey Epstein case? Why is Donald Trump so damn worried about it? Why is he freaking out? Why is he throwing Rosie O'Donnell into the mix? When he's going after Rosie O'Donnell, it is. Remember that when the Trump fragrance came out over the summer, earlier this summer, the Trump fragrance. This is the scent of desperation, ladies and gentlemen. Available in all of your tacky stores now. The Trump fragrance, the scent of desperation. That's what you're smelling right now from Donald Trump. There are lots of things I suppose you can smell, but what you're smelling right now is desperation. When he goes after Rosie, he's desperate. And the reason why he's desperate is, I think it's because what Vicky was saying. We've never really heard him grilled on this topic, and he should be grilled on it. Why are you so freaked out about this, babe? You said you were going to release the Epstein files, and I'll say it again, dude. Where's my Epstein file, dude? Where's my Epstein list? And I'll leave it at that. Thanks everybody for putting up with my insanely white hot background today. It was actually hailing when I got off the bus, which was necessary because my plane landed in the wrong city. When I got off the bus, it was hailing where I'm in Colorado right now. And now, of course, it's picture perfect. I could have done this whole thing outside, but then I would have had hail hitting me upside the top of my head. But in the meantime, thanks everybody for watching. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. If you missed any part of this, of course, you'll be able to see the recording later here on Substack or on YouTube, or listen to it on Apple Podcasts. A lot of people were checking out the Apple Podcasts over the weekend of my conversation with Julie Brown. That's still available. I think folks are want to listen to this as well. Mark Epstein, I think, was asking a lot of interesting questions. Until next time, still reporting, I'm Jim Acosta. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.